My name is Phil Rees. I've spent much of my career meeting men and women called terrorists in the West. It used to be said that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. But after 9/11, that seemed to change.
Either you are with us, or you are with the terrorists.
Western politicians declared a war on terror and used the phrase as if we all know what it means.
Thank you all.
The United States and Europe list dozens of terrorist organizations.
Directly responsible.
Terrorism is a powerful word. It is a label placed on violence that can never be accepted in a civilized society.
These are bad people.
I'll be breaking bread with those labeled terrorists by the West and ask, when does a man have the right to fight without being called a terrorist? For the next 6 weeks, I'm taking a journey along the borders of the West's war on terror to try and determine the meaning of a word. Terrorist. I traveled to the crucible of this global conflict, Afghanistan, where Al-Qaeda was based. President Obama intends to double the US deployment here, with up to 30,000 additional troops in 2009. On a desolate mountainside, I joined a platoon of US soldiers at an outpost on the front line of this war. They are overlooking the Korangal Valley. Taliban fighters from Pakistan passed through here. The border is only 20 kilometers away.
We're coming in the front gate at Firebase Vegas, and I'll just show you guys around.
Vegas.
Roger.
Sign here. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Yeah, kind of. Watch your step here.
The troops call this ravine the Valley of Death. In the 5 months they've been here, they've been attacked more than 100 times. It is one of the most dangerous outposts in Afghanistan.
Yeah, we call this whole area no man's land, so we kind of try to stay out of it. If you're going to be out here, you got to have your full gear on. Rule of thumb is, if you can see the mountains, then they can obviously see you.
There are mountains everywhere.
Right? Yeah. Not saying they're just out there shooting. They're actually aiming, and they're getting a little better every time. Right now, I'm going to take you to one of our fighting positions that covers all our engagement area back here.
Martinez and his troops regularly defend the camp from Taliban fighters.
Once they've hit us with a large amount of force. It was about 40 individuals. And we got into a good little firefight with them, and they continued to advance, and it crossed the concertina wire. And we've had soldiers that were engaging with, obviously with direct fire, but we were also throwing hand grenades in that area. So that was a pretty bad day.
Do you regard your enemy as terrorists? Because this is a war on terror, you're on the front line of it.
Right.
I mean, how do you perceive them in that sense?
Actually, yeah, I do. I mean, they have cut the heads off of some of our workers. They do terrorize some of the villagers. Obviously, if we can keep them, the bad guys or the terrorists here in the valley fighting us, that's a lot better. I mean, I'd rather have it like that than to have them go and blow up some coffee shop or have another 9/11.
While the West and its allies confront an enemy called terror, it seems that we should at least know exactly who is a terrorist. My attempt to understand the meaning of terrorism began unexpectedly 3 decades ago. I was a college student and on holiday in Ireland. I'm following the same route that I took on a warm summer's day in 1979. I'm now in Northern Ireland, which is under British rule, but I'm driving south towards an international border. Beyond that, it's the Republic of Ireland, which fought for its independence from British colonial rule more than 80 years ago. At the time of my first visit, the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, was fighting for a united Ireland. As well as killing British soldiers, it planted bombs that targeted civilians. When I was a teenager growing up in the London area, the British media regularly referred to the Irish Republican Army as terrorists. They were evil murderers who used guns and bombs to try to end British rule in the north. At that time, I felt I knew who was a terrorist. But my views were challenged one night in a small pub in the farming town of Coot Hill, where the IRA had supporters. I was in this bar when, in August 1979, people cheered when they heard the evening news.
Lord Mountbatten and his young boatman were killed immediately.
The IRA had murdered the British Queen's uncle, Lord Mountbatten, and 2 teenagers. On the same day, there was a deadly ambush.
20 minutes and 300 yards separated 2 huge explosions, which claimed the lives of 18 soldiers in the most devastating attack the army have ever suffered here.
30 years later, I'm joining locals who remember that day well. And when the news came up on the television screen, there was a lot of support from people here. A lot of people clinking glasses, a lot of people saying, well, you know, good. And I mean, I must say, I was surprised by that as a young man.
Yeah, well, like, there was a war going on against British forces and the British Crown, like, and any act that was carried out like that was seen as a legitimate target. Coming with their army for to terrorise and harass the people of the country, we don't want them. Through really good...
For the first time, I understood how people seen as terrorists in one country can be seen very differently in another.
And they had to take up the gun. And I would class them people as freedom fighters. They were never terrorists in my eyes.
I think history will show that in most cases, the gun wins out.
After 3 decades of violence, the IRA was offered a deal by the British government. In return for laying down its weapons, political and social reforms were introduced in Northern Ireland.
I think violence can bring you so far, but at the end of it all, you're going to have to sit down and you're going to have to talk.
Definitely, it opens the discussion, so it does, to give people the right to talk, because before the violence in Northern Ireland, nobody listened to us.
After leaving Ireland, I went on to cover conflicts in various corners of the earth, meeting men and women labelled terrorists by their foes. By then, I considered it a word used by politicians and the partisan, not an impartial observer. But that appeared to change on one September morning. A short walk from the site of the World Trade Center is a memorial for the 3,000 people who died on that day. Crowds still gather to pay their respects.
The world has changed. This new phenomenon has made us rethink our basic principles. It is what I call terrorism without limit. In other words, they killed 3,000 people, but if they could have killed 30,000, they would have killed 30,000.
After 9/11, an ideological whirlwind swept through the West's political institutions, media, and think tanks. A view was formulated that 9/11 marked a new phase in human history.
Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated. The United States introduced a new doctrine that aimed to eradicate anything it considered terrorism. It was an attempt by neocon politicians to redefine the world. They called it the Global War on Terror.
It was their determination that this was an opportunity for America to go to war against every terrorist in every state that sponsored terrorists in the world.
Are you saying, therefore, that the war on terror and the language, therefore, used was in order to escalate the conflict beyond simply the perpetrators of 9/11?
Absolutely.
The phrase, the war on terror, was used to provide a moral basis for a conflict that Western leaders say will last a generation.
I don't want to hear they're going to help us anymore because they're not helping us.
But how does this war on terror unfold in countries where foreign soldiers are usually seen as an army of occupation?